Where did you get that bracelet? She said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. 50 pairs of eyes snapped toward her. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A 24-year-old waitress with flour on her apron and grief in her eyes had just walked straight up to the most feared table in the room, and every single person in that diner thought she had lost her mind. If this story already has your heart beating faster, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, and stay with me all the way to the end. Because what happened next in that little diner in Red Creek, Arizona changed every single life in that town forever. The heat in Red Creek, Arizona in the middle of July was not the kind of heat that made you uncomfortable. It was the kind of heat that made you angry. The kind that crawled under your skin and reminded you every single second of every single day that you were small and the desert was large and the sun did not care about your problems one bit. Emily Carter understood that feeling better than most. She had been running the Red Creek Family Diner for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the exact count because every single one of those days had been a fight. A fight to keep the lights on. A fight to keep the suppliers paid. A fight to keep smiling at customers when the numbers in her ledger looked like a slow-moving disaster. Her father, Michael Carter, had built this diner with his own 2 hands 22 years ago, back when he came home from the Army with a bad knee, a few medals he never talked about, and a dream of feeding people. He had poured everything into it, his savings, his sweat, his whole heart. And then 5 years ago, he had disappeared, not walked away, not left a note, not chosen something else, disappeared. One night, there had been terrible flooding in the canyon roads east of town. Michael Carter had driven out there because that was who he was, a man who showed up. 3 families had been trapped by rising water, and he had heard it on the scanner in the diner kitchen and grabbed his old Army kit and gotten in his truck without a second thought. Search and rescue teams had found the families, cared wet and alive, but they had never found Michael Carter. They had found his truck half buried in silt downstream. They had found his Army jacket snagged on a fence post, but they had never found him. The county declared him deceased after 2 years. Emily's mother, Carol Carter, had quietly moved to Tucson to live with her sister 6 months after that because staying in Red Creek meant driving past the diner every day, and she could not do it anymore. She had begged Emily to come with her. Emily had said no, not because she was stubborn, though she was, but because walking away from the diner felt like admitting that her father was truly gone. And something deep inside Emily Carter, something she could not explain, and had stopped trying to refuse to believe that. So she stayed. She hired back the 2 cooks her father had let go before he disappeared. She kept the Tuesday special chicken fried steak with white gravy and 2 sides because her father had never once changed that Tuesday special in 22 years, and she was not about to be the one who did. She smiled at the regulars. She topped off coffee without being asked. She fixed the broken front step that the landlord kept promising to fix and never did. And at night, when the diner was empty and clean and quiet, she sat at the corner booth with a cup of tea and looked at the framed photograph of her father on the wall behind the register, and she talked to him. She told him about the broken refrigerator compressor that had cost her $800 she did not have. She told him about the new family that had moved in down the road and how the little girl always ordered the grilled cheese and always left a drawing on the napkin. She told him she was scared. She told him she was tired. She told him she missed him every single day. She also told him she was not leaving. That Tuesday in July started like every other Tuesday. Hank Briggs, a retired rancher, with hands like 2 baseball gloves, was in his usual seat at the counter by 6 in the morning, working through his scrambled eggs and not talking much because Hank never talked much before 8. The Delgado brothers came in around 7 for their coffee and their ongoing argument about the best route to drive between Red Creek and Phoenix, which they had been arguing about for 11 years without resolution. Donna Whitfield, who taught 3rd grade at the elementary school during the year and spent summers worrying about her tomato plants, was in the corner booth with a crossword puzzle and a glass of sweet tea. It was ordinary. It was familiar. It was exactly the kind of morning Emily needed, because the night before she had spent 3 hours on the phone with her father's old accountant, trying to figure out whether she could make payroll at the end of the month, and the answer had been a long silence, followed by the words, "It's going to be very close, honey." By 11 o'clock, the lunch crowd was starting to filter in. By noon, the diner was full. By 12:30, Emily had refilled the coffee station twice and was already thinking about the dinner prep she needed to start by 2. And then the sound came. She heard it before she saw anything. Everyone in the diner heard it. It started low, almost like distant thunder, but it didn't roll or fade the way thunder did. It built. It kept building. It became something physical, a vibration she could feel in the soles of her shoes through the linoleum floor, a rumble that shook the glasses hanging above the counter just slightly, just enough. Donna Whitfield looked up from her crossword. Hank Briggs turned slowly on his stool. Everybody in the diner stopped moving at the same time. Then the motorcycles came into view through the big front window, and nobody said a word. They came in a formation that was tight and deliberate and absolutely unmistakable. The colors, the patches, the particular way they carried themselves, even on bikes, with a kind of territorial certainty that said they were not passing through so much as arriving. And they kept coming. 1, 5, 10, 20. Emily stood at the counter counting and stopped counting when she got to 50 because the parking lot was full and they were still coming around the corner. Hell's Angels. Donna Whitfield quietly closed her crossword puzzle. One of the Delgado brothers put a 20 on the table, which was more than enough to cover both their coffees and a generous tip. And he and his brother stood up slowly and walked to the door in a way that was not quite running, but was also not quite walking. A couple in the far booth who Emily had never seen before, tourists, she had guessed from their rental car key fob, left 2 plates of food virtually untouched and followed the Delgados out. Hank Briggs did not move. But Hank Briggs had served 2 tours in Korea and had once broken up a bar fight involving 4 men considerably larger than himself using nothing but his voice. So his stillness was a different kind of stillness than everyone else's. Emily stood behind the counter. The first riders came through the door in groups of 3 and 4, scanning the room with the practiced ease of people who had learned long ago to know exactly what kind of room they were walking into. Several of them were well past 60. Some were younger. One of them, a large man with close-cropped gray hair and a beard that had gone from pepper to salt sometime in the last decade, moved to the biggest table in the room, the round 6-top near the window, with a kind of authority that required no announcement. Others pulled chairs from nearby tables. Others took the booths. The room rearranged itself around them without a word being spoken. Emily stood still. Her notepad was in her hand. Her pen was behind her ear. And she was staring at the large man with the gray hair. Not at his face. At his wrist. At the bracelet on his left wrist. It was not an unusual-looking piece of jewelry exactly. It was a military-style identification bracelet, the kind that came back in style in the 90s, made of stainless steel with a small plate on top. The kind of thing a veteran might wear as a quiet acknowledgement of service. The kind of thing nobody would look twice at in a town full of people who had served. Except Emily Carter knew that bracelet. She knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. She knew the particular scratch on the right side of the plate because she had watched her father get that scratch one Christmas when he was moving boxes in the garage and knocked his wrist against the shelf corner and made a sound that he immediately tried to pretend was not pain, so his daughters wouldn't worry. She knew the slight discoloration on the clasp from years of being taken off and put back on during surgery rotations in the Army when regulations required it. She knew it because she had given it to her father herself on his 40th birthday, a gift from her and her younger sister with his initials engraved on the back. MJC, Michael James Carter. Emily Carter set down the coffee pot in her hand very carefully on the counter. She straightened her apron. She took a breath that was so controlled it was almost a kind of prayer. And then she walked across the diner toward the table of 50 Hell's Angels riders. She was aware of the room. She was aware that Hank Briggs had gone very still on his stool. She was aware that the remaining customers were watching her with the kind of paralyzed attention people give to a person who is doing something terrifying and inexplicable, and that they cannot look away from. She was aware that the riders nearest to her were clocking her movement with expressions that shifted from dismissal to curiosity to something more watchful. She stopped at the table. The large man with the gray hair looked up. "Where did you get that bracelet?" The table went completely silent. The large man's eyes did not change expression for a long moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected that he is deciding whether or not to take seriously. His eyes moved from her face down to his wrist and then back up to her face. "Excuse me." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "The bracelet on your wrist," Emily said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. "I want to know where you got it." The man on the large gray-haired man's left, a wiry guy with a long braid and a sun-worn face, let out a short sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "Little girl, you want to go back to the coffee station." "I'm not talking to you," Emily said, and she did not even look at him when she said it. Her eyes stayed on the gray-haired man. "I'm asking you." The table was very, very quiet. The gray-haired man tilted his head slightly. His eyes had changed. There was something in them now that had not been there 30 seconds ago. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. "It's mine," he said. "No," Emily said. "It isn't." She reached into the pocket of her apron. She had carried it every day for 5 years, the way some people carry a photograph or a rosary, a small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and placed it flat on the table between them, and it was a photocopy of the original receipt from the engraving shop in Tucson, the one she had paid for herself with 3 weeks of babysitting money when she was 19 years old. And the order form listed the bracelet specifications, the style number, the metal type, and the engraving, MJC. She watched the man read it. She watched his face. "My name is Emily Carter," she said quietly. "My father is Michael James Carter. He was an Army medic. He disappeared 5 years ago during a flood in the canyon roads outside this town. That bracelet was a birthday gift from me and my sister, and it has been on his wrist in every single photograph of him since his 40th birthday." She paused. "So I am going to ask you one more time. Where did you get that bracelet?" The man named Jack Donovan, though she did not know his name yet, looked at the receipt for a long time. Then he looked up at her. Something had shifted behind his eyes. The calculation was gone. What replaced it was something that looked almost like pain. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'd rather stand." "Emily." He used her name. Her name in his mouth sounded like he had been carrying it somewhere and had finally found the place to put it down. "Please sit down." She sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the table had gone still in a way that was different from the earlier silence. The wiry man with the braid had dropped whatever posture he had been performing. The writers nearest the table had leaned in slightly involuntarily. Hank Briggs at the counter had turned all the way around on his stool. "What's your road name?" Emily said, because she had learned some things in 5 years of looking. "Reaper," the man said. "And you're a road captain." It was not really a question, but he nodded. "How long have you had the bracelet?" Emily said. Jack Donovan looked at his wrist. His hand turned over slowly, and he looked at the back of the plate the way he had clearly looked at it many times before. 4 years and 8 months, he said. Emily's breath caught, because that meant whoever had given it to him had given it to him 4 months after her father disappeared, which meant whoever gave it to him had known her father after he disappeared. "Who gave it to you?" she said. Jack Donovan looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that cracked the foundation of everything Emily Carter thought she knew about the last 5 years of her life. "Your father did." The diner went so quiet Emily could hear the ceiling fan. "He gave it to me himself," Jack said, "on a highway outside Flagstaff, about 4 months after the flood." Emily's hands were flat on the table and she could feel them trembling, and she could not make them stop. "That's not possible," she said, and her voice was still steady, but only barely the way a cracked thing is still standing, but you can see the fracture running through it. "They found his truck. They found his jacket. He was declared—" "I know what he was declared," Jack said, "and I know how it looked, and I know what the county said." He leaned forward. "And I'm telling you what I know to be true. Michael Carter was alive 4 years and 8 months ago. He gave me this bracelet himself, and he told me—" He stopped. "What?" Emily said. "What did he tell you?" Jack Donovan looked around the table. Something moved between the writers, a current of recognition, a decision being made collectively in the space of 2 seconds. He looked back at her. "He told me to take care of it. He said if anything happened to him, if he couldn't come back, he wanted someone to make sure it got to his daughter." He paused. "He said you were the one who would keep looking." Emily Carter sat at that table with 50 Hells Angels riders in the diner her father built, and she pressed her hands flat against the table to keep them still. And she looked at the bracelet on Jack Donovan's wrist, and she did not cry. She wanted to. The feeling was enormous, a flooding kind of feeling, the kind that comes when something you have been holding back for 5 years suddenly finds the crack it has been looking for. But she did not let it out, not yet. Because if her father was alive, If he had been alive, then the question was not where he was. The question was why. Why had he not come home? Why didn't he come back? She said. And Jack Donovan's expression shifted again. And this time what she saw there was not pain. It was something harder, something careful. Because he said he was afraid of what would happen to you and your mother if he did. The wiry man with the braid made a small sound. One of the older riders at the edge of the table put his hand briefly on the table and then took it away. Small movements, small acknowledgments of something they all knew and had been carrying. Afraid of what? Emily said. Of the people who wanted him gone. Emily looked at him. What people? Jack said a name. And three things happened simultaneously in the Red Creek family diner. The last remaining tourist near the window stood up very quickly and went for the door. Hank Briggs at the counter turned back around and stared at his coffee cup and was very still. And Emily Carter felt the world she had been living in for 5 years rearrange itself into an entirely different shape, one that was darker and more complicated and somehow against all logic, slightly more hopeful. Because a man who disappeared to protect his family or from something is not a dead man. He is a man with a reason. He is a man with a story, and a story Emily Carter knew was something you could follow. Tell me everything, she said. And Jack Donovan looked at her for a long moment, at the flower still on her apron, at the set of her jaw, at the particular kind of stillness she carried that was not fear, but something much older and more durable than fear. And he seemed to make a decision. He pulled his coffee cup toward him, looked at it, set it down. It's going to take a while, he said. I've got time, Emily said. I've been waiting 5 years. And at the counter, one of the diner's two cooks leaned out of the pass-through window, looked at the scene in the dining room, the young woman sitting at the table of bikers, the stillness of the room, the weight of something that had just been set into motion, and then looked at the other cook and said very quietly, "We're probably going to need more coffee." He was not wrong. Jack Donovan began to talk. And as he talked, the diner stayed full because nobody left, not the remaining customers, not Hank Briggs, not even Donna Whitfield, who had put her crossword completely away by now and was sitting very still with her hands folded on the table in front of her listening. Because even from across the room, even catching only fragments of what was being said, everyone in the Red Creek family diner could feel it. Something had been sleeping in that town for 5 years. And a 24-year-old waitress with flour on her apron had just walked up to the most feared table in the room and woken it up. Jack Donovan's voice was low and even and carried the particular weight of someone who has rehearsed something in his head many times and is finally, after a very long wait, being given the chance to say it out loud. He told her about the accident, not the flood that came later. He told her about 3 years before the flood, on a stretch of highway outside Flagstaff on a Sunday night, when a truck had forced 2 of his riders off the road in the dark, and it had gone very badly, very fast. He told her about lying in the road with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder, and watching his friend Danny bleeding from somewhere that looked serious, and the sound of a truck stopping and boots on the asphalt, and then a voice saying calm and matter-of-fact and military precise, "I'm a medic, tell me what you need from me." "Your father stopped," Jack said. "He was on his way back from a supply run. Had his kit in the truck. He didn't drive past. He didn't wait for the paramedics. He got out and he worked on Danny for 11 minutes with his hands and a kit that was 4 years out of date, and Danny is alive today because of those 11 minutes. Emily did not say anything. "We don't forget things like that," Jack said. "In our world, that means something permanent." Michael Carter stopped and helped 3 strangers who every person in that county would have told him to avoid, and he didn't ask for anything in return, and he didn't tell anyone about it, and he left his card and said if we ever needed anything from him, just call. He paused. "We didn't expect to need to call, but we kept the card." "And then the flood," Emily said. "And then the flood," Jack agreed. "But before the flood, about 2 months before your father called us." Emily looked up. "He was scared," Jack said. "Not for himself. That was the first thing he said when I picked up. I'm not calling for me. He had found something, working on his taxes of all things, he had found something wrong with the property records on a parcel of land adjacent to his. The diner sits on the edge of 3 different parcels, apparently, and one of them had been quietly reassigned in a records update, and when he pulled the thread, Jack shook his head slightly. He pulled a long thread. "What was on it?" Emily said. "Names," Jack said. "Dates. Transfer documents that had been altered. A pattern going back almost 15 years of properties changing hands at below market value, or being condemned on questionable grounds, or changing owners in ways that, if you knew what you were looking for, pointed to the same destination every time. One person, Emily said. One name, Jack confirmed. Gerald Foss. The name landed in the room. Gerald Foss was not a man who looked like trouble. That was, Emily would later come to understand, the most dangerous thing about him. He was 61, silver-haired, a regular at the County Chamber of Commerce. Luncheons a donor to the local hospital's annual gala. The kind of man who shook hands with both of his hands and looked you in the eye the whole time, and whose name appeared on 3 buildings in Red Creek, and whose family had been in the county for 4 generations. He was widely described as a pillar of the community. He owned a development company. He had been buying land in the surrounding county for the better part of 20 years, patiently, methodically, without particular drama. He had the right permits. He had the right friends. He had the right conversations with the right people at the right times. He had also, if Michael Carter's research was correct, been systematically stealing land from families who didn't know enough to fight back. Your father was not an investigator, Jack said. He was not a lawyer. He was a cook with an Army medic background and a talent for math. But the math told a story that he could not ignore. He looked at Emily steadily. He made copies of everything, a lot of copies. He hid them in multiple places. And then he called me because he needed someone he trusted who was not from inside this county, someone who Foss's people couldn't reach, and he wanted us to know where the copies were in case something happened. In case something happened, Emily repeated. He thought he was being watched, Jack said. He didn't tell your mother. He didn't want her scared. He was trying to figure out the right way to bring it to someone who could actually do something with it. And then the flood happened, Emily said. Her voice had gone very flat and very quiet. And then the flood happened, Jack said. And he went out to help those families like he always did, because that's who he was. And whatever happened in those canyon roads, we don't know everything, but we know it wasn't random. Emily Carter sat very still. You think someone used the flood, she said. Not a question, a statement. The kind that lands like something dropping from a height. Jack looked at her for a long time. I think it, he said carefully, that your father called me 2 hours before he drove out to those canyons, and he told me that he had gotten a call from someone who said there were families trapped and he was going to help, and if he didn't call me back within 12 hours, I should assume the worst and protect what he had hidden. He paused. He did not call back. The ceiling fan turned. The coffee cooled in the cups. Emily Carter looked at the bracelet on Jack Donovan's wrist, and she thought about her father driving out to the canyon roads in the dark because someone had called and said there were families who needed help. And she thought about how perfectly that trap was constructed, built entirely from the knowledge of who Michael Carter was, of what he could not walk away from, of the particular way that good men are always most vulnerable to exactly that quality in themselves. Where are the documents, she said. That's what we've been trying to find out, Jack said. He told me where some of them were. We've collected some of them over the years, quietly, carefully, because going at this wrong would just bury it deeper. He looked at her with something that was direct and appraising and respectful all at once. But there are pieces we're missing, and the person who knew where those pieces were was my father, Emily said. Is your father? Jack said quietly. We have reason to believe he's still alive, Emily. Not certain, not confirmed, but reason to believe. The room tilted slightly. Emily Carter gripped the edge of the table. What reason, she said. Jack reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a photograph on the table between them. It was blurry. It was taken from a distance, clearly without the subject's knowledge. It showed a man lean and gray at the temples, now standing outside a building in what looked like a small town, somewhere desert flat and unfamiliar. The man was looking away from the camera, but the angle of his jaw, the particular way he stood with his weight slightly on his left leg because the right knee never had quite healed. Emily pressed her fingers over her mouth. When was this taken? She whispered. 7 months ago, Jack said. We don't know where he is now. We don't know why he hasn't tried to contact you. But we think he believes that as long as the documents aren't public, coming home would put you in danger. He paused. We think he's waiting. We think he's been waiting for someone to finish what he started. Emily Carter looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked up. Then let's finish it, she said. And across the table, Jack Donovan, who had been writing for 40 years and had sat across from all manner of people in all manner of difficult rooms, looked at this 24-year-old woman with the flower on her apron and the grief behind her eyes and the jaw set like she was about to walk into something that would require everything she had, and he believed her. "All right," he said, and the diner held its breath. And the story that had been buried for 5 years in Red Creek, Arizona, began at last to come back to the surface. The coffee had gone cold. Nobody touched it. Jack Donovan had been talking for 40 minutes, and in that 40 minutes, Emily Carter had not moved from her chair, had not looked away from his face, and had not made a sound, except for twice once when he said her father's name in a context she had not expected, and once when he placed the photograph on the table. That second time, she had pressed her fingers over her mouth and held them there until she trusted herself again. Now the photograph was still on the table between them. Emily had not picked it up. She was afraid that if she picked it up, it would feel less real the way dreams sometimes dissolve the moment you tried to hold them. 7 months ago, she said again, not asking, processing. "A town called Mineral Wells," Jack said. "Small, east of Wickenburg. Our guy out there, he wasn't looking for your father. He was passing through on unrelated business, and he saw a man who matched the description we'd been circulating internally for 3 years. He took the photo on his phone, sent it to me within the hour. Did he approach him? No." Jack shook his head. "I told him not to, because if your father is living under a different name or in hiding, approaching him wrong could spook him into moving. And then we'd lose him again." He looked at her steadily. "We needed more than a photo before we made a move." "So you've been sitting on this for 7 months, Emily said, and there was an edge in her voice, now not quite anger, but something adjacent to it, something that had weight. "We've been building toward it for 7 months, Jack said. "There's a difference." The man with the long braid, his name was Cutter, she had gathered from the way the others addressed him, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "We're not law enforcement. We can't just walk into a situation like this without knowing the full shape of it. You go at something like Gerald Foss half-cocked, you don't get a second chance." "I'm not half-cocked," Emily said. "No," Cutter said, and he looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite respect, but was somewhere between the two. "You're not." An older writer at the far end of the table, a man Emily would later learn, had been with the chapter since before Jack had made a low sound in his throat. "Jack, tell her the rest." Emily looked at Jack. "There's more." Jack picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, put it down without drinking. 3 months ago, he said, one of the witnesses your father had originally found a man named Roy Pelham, a retired county surveyor, who had firsthand knowledge of how some of the property transfers were documented. Roy agreed to talk to us. Took us 2 years to get him to that point. He was scared. He'd been scared since your father disappeared because Roy knew what that disappearance most likely meant. "What happened to Roy?" Emily said. "He talked to us on a Thursday," Jack said. "The following Monday, he had a stroke." The word dropped into the conversation like something thrown from a height. Emily felt it land. "He's alive," Jack said quickly. "But he's in a care facility in Prescott, and he won't speak anymore. His daughter says it happened very fast. Says he'd been fine. Said the only unusual thing in the week before was that someone had come to his house asking questions, a man she didn't recognize, who said he was from the county assessor's office." "And was he?" Emily said. "The county assessor's office has no record of sending anyone to Roy Pelham's house," Jack said. "Ever." Emily Carter sat with that for a moment. She thought about Roy Pelham, whoever he was, a retired surveyor, who had spent 2 years being too afraid to talk, and then found the courage to talk, and then had a stroke 4 days later. She thought about her father, who had found something in a tax record and pulled a thread and then driven into canyon roads in the dark and vanished. She thought about the particular logic that connected those two things. The logic of a man like Gerald Foss, who had been doing this for 15 years, who had learned exactly how to reach into a situation and close it quietly before it opened too far. "He's been watching," she said, "this whole time. He has people watching for anything that could bring this back up." "That's what we believe," Jacqueline said, which means, Emily said slowly, that 50 Hells Angels motorcycles just pulled into the parking lot of Michael Carter's diner. The table was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Cutter said, "Yeah, we know." "Was that intentional?" Jack looked at her. "We needed a reason to be here that looked like nothing. Riders passing through a small town stopping for lunch. Not investigators, not witnesses, just a Tuesday. But you were coming here to find me, Emily said. We were coming here to find you, Jack confirmed. Emily Carter looked around the table. At the faces of men who ranged from somewhere around her age to somewhere around her father's age, who had spent 3 years quietly moving around the edges of something dangerous because they had not forgotten a man who stopped on a dark highway and spent 11 minutes keeping someone alive. She thought about what that meant about loyalty of that depth and duration, and she felt something shift inside her chest that was not entirely grief and not entirely gratitude, but was some combination of both that didn't have a clean name. Okay, she said. So what do you have? Jack reached into the inside pocket of his coat again, and this time what he produced was not a photograph. It was a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases from being opened and closed many times. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the table and turned it so she could read it. It was a list, handwritten. The handwriting was her father's. Emily recognized it immediately, the particular way he made his sevens with a horizontal bar, threw them a habit from his army days, and the recognition hit her so suddenly and so physically that she had to press her feet flat on the floor to keep herself grounded. He gave us this the night he called, Jack said. Said it was a map, not a literal map, a list of locations where he had stored copies of the documents. Emily read the list. There were 7 items. 3 were addresses. 2 were what appeared to be storage unit numbers with partial codes. 1 was a name she didn't recognize. 1 was simply the word diner with a set of numbers after it. Her eyes stopped on the last item. She looked up. The diner, she said. We figure your father hid something here, Jack said. In the diner, before he disappeared. But we didn't have access, and we weren't about to break into a grieving family's place of business. He paused. We needed you. Emily looked at the list again. The numbers after the word diner were not a phone number. They were not a date. She stared at them, and then it hit her with such sudden clarity that she made a small sound. It's a combination, she said. A combination to what Cutter said. Emily stood up from the table so fast her chair scraped the floor. She was already moving toward the counter, already going around the back, and Jack was on his feet, and 2 other riders were standing before they even fully understood why. She went behind the register and through the pass-through door into the kitchen, and the cook, a stout, weathered man named Pete, who had worked for her father for 12 years, looked up from the grill with an expression that combined alarm and genuine confusion. Emily, what? The walk-in, she said. Move. Pete stepped aside without fully understanding why, and she pushed open the heavy walk-in refrigerator door, and Jack was right behind her, and the cold hit them both. And she was counting steps, going to the back left corner, going to the shelving unit her father had built himself out of steel pipe because the manufactured ones were never sturdy enough for him. She got down on one knee and looked at the base of the shelving unit, and there it was, a small panel, maybe 6 inches square, set into the wall behind the lowest shelf, almost completely hidden behind a box of industrial-sized tomato cans. How did you know? Jack said from behind her. Because, Emily said, pulling the tomato cans forward, my father built every shelf in this kitchen by himself. Every one of them is secured to the wall with 4 bolts. This one has always only had 3. I asked him about it when I was 17, and he said he ran out of the right size bolt. She looked at the panel. He never ran out of anything. Her hands were not quite steady. She pulled out her phone and looked at the list Jack had photographed and read the numbers and entered them into the small combination dial her father had set into the panel. And on the 3rd number, the panel clicked and swung open. Inside was a metal document box, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, fireproof, waterproof, sealed. It was cold to the touch. Emily pulled it out. It was heavier than she expected. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. We need somewhere private, she said. They brought the box to the corner booth that Emily always thought of as hers, the one where she drank her tea at night and talked to her father's photograph. Pete stood at the kitchen pass-through, keeping everyone else at a respectful distance without being asked to. Hank Briggs, who had not moved from his stool in 2 hours, was watching everything with his hands around his coffee mug and the expression of a man who has decided that whatever is happening is important enough to wait out. Emily opened the box. It was full of papers, organized, numbered, tabbed. Her father had been methodical. Of course he had been methodical. He was a medic. He had spent years in environments where disorganization cost lives. The papers were in plastic sleeves, dated and labeled in the same handwriting as the list. She picked up the first section and started reading. Jack sat across from her. He did not rush her. He watched her face as she read the way people watch a face for the thing the words are doing to the person behind the eyes. It took her 12 minutes to get through the first section. When she looked up, her expression had changed. He has everything, she said. Surveys, transfer documents, bank records. He has the names of 3 county officials who signed off on transactions they had no legal authority to sign off on. He has correspondence, actual letters between Foss's development company and a title company in Phoenix that processed transfers that should never have cleared. She stopped. He has the names of 47 families. 47, Jack said. 47 families who lost property. Some of them got lowball buyouts. Some of them got condemned on code violations that were either fabricated or massively overstated. Some of them just their titles got quietly reassigned in a records update, and by the time they noticed the legal window to contest had closed. She set the papers down. Her hands were steadier now than they had been. Anger she had discovered long ago was actually a very stabilizing emotion. This has been going on for 15 years. We knew the shape of it, Jack said. We didn't have the documentation. You do now, Emily said. Cutter had come to stand at the edge of the booth. He was looking at the papers with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that meant it was covering something less neutral. This is enough to file with, he said. File with who? Emily said. He has county officials. He has people in this system who are already protecting this. State, Jack said. State AG's office. And there are journalists who've been sniffing at Foss's operation for 2 years without being able to get traction. Give them documentation like this, and they have traction. And between now and when that happens, Emily said, I'm sitting in a diner with a document box that can destroy one of the most powerful men in the county, and he has people watching for exactly this. The table was very quiet. Yes, Jack said, that's correct. So what's the plan? We don't move the documents today, Jack said. We photograph everything. Multiple people, multiple devices, all uploaded to off-site storage before we leave this parking lot. The physical box goes somewhere safe, not here. He looked at her. And you go about your day like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, Emily said, and the flatness in her voice made Cutter look at her sideways. Except that I know my father is most likely alive, and I know he's been hiding for 5 years because he's afraid for us, and I have a box of documents that could bring down half the county establishment. She looked at Jack. Everything has changed. I know, Jack said quietly. I know it has. Emily picked up the photograph again, looked at it. The man standing outside the building in mineral realms, looking away from the camera, lean and gray, at the temples, her father. Alive probably 7 months ago, maybe alive now, alive and hiding and waiting for someone to finish what he started. I want to go to Mineral Wells, she said. Emily, not today, she said, not tomorrow, but I want to find him, and I want to be the one to tell him it's finished. She looked up from the photograph. Can you understand that? Jack Donovan was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her in the way that she was starting to recognize, that measuring, careful look that was not doubting her exactly, but was the look of a man who has been in enough situations to know that the ones who say, I want to be the one, always mean it, and are almost never prepared for what being the one actually costs. I can understand it, he said, but first we have to actually finish it. Then let's talk about how, Emily said, and she opened the document box back up and spread the papers across the table, and the corner booth that she had always thought of as hers became something else, became the place where the case against Gerald Foss and everything he had done and everyone who had helped him began to take on the shape of something that could not be undone. For the next 2 hours they worked. Jack and Cutter and 2 other writers whose names Emily learned were Bridges and Salas went through every paper, while Emily explained the local context which county office handled, which type of transfer, which name appeared in the right margin of which document, what the procedures should have been versus what they appeared to have been. Pete kept the kitchen door closed and didn't ask questions and kept fresh coffee coming through the pass-through window at regular intervals, because Pete was a man who understood that sometimes the best thing you could do was be useful and silent. At some point, Donna Whitfield appeared at the edge of the booth. Emily looked up. Donna had her purse in her hands and her crossword folded under her arm, and she was looking at Emily with an expression that was complicated and direct. I know Roy Pelham, Donna said. I taught his granddaughter for 2 years. She paused. And I know 3 of the families on whatever list you're looking at, because their children sat in my classroom and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. She put her purse down on the edge of the booth. What do you need? Emily looked at her. You understand what you're getting into. I teach 31 children a year, Donna Whitfield said simply. This is their town too. And then Hank Briggs was there, standing behind Donna, his coffee mug finally empty. My family's ranch borders 2 of those condemned parcels, he said. I always knew the condemnations were wrong. I couldn't prove it. He looked at the papers on the table. Looks like somebody already did. Emily Carter looked at the 2 of them, a retired school teacher and an old rancher, standing in the diner where her father had spent 22 years feeding this town, and then she looked at Jack Donovan. Jack was watching the 2 of them with an expression she couldn't fully read. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all day. Your father said something else, he said, when he called me that night, before the flood. He paused. He said the reason he was scared wasn't just for himself. It was because he knew that if this came out, it had to come out all the way, not halfway. He said if it only came out halfway, Foss would survive it, and everyone who helped bring it out would be in danger, and the town would be worse off than before. He looked at Emily. He said the only way it works is if enough people stand up at the same time that there's no one person left to threaten. Emily looked at Donna, at Hank, at the paper spread across her father's corner booth. Then that's what we're going to do, she said. We're going to find enough people. Outside, the motorcycles sat in the parking lot in the July heat, and the town of Red Creek went about its Tuesday afternoon the way small towns do, unaware mostly of the thing that had just shifted inside the diner at its center. But things were in motion now that could not be stopped. Documents had been found. Photographs were already being uploaded to places Gerald Foss had no reach. Names had been spoken out loud that had not been spoken out loud in 5 years. And the phone in Emily Carter's apron pocket buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She looked at Jack. He had seen it too. She answered it. 3 seconds of silence. Then a voice she did not recognize, smooth, measured the voice of someone who was very accustomed to being the most powerful person in the room, said, Miss Carter, I think it might be time for you and I to have a conversation. Emily Carter looked at Jack Donovan across the table of documents, and she said, I think you're right. And she held the phone away from her ears so Jack could hear, and she reached for the document box, and she was not afraid. Or rather, she was afraid and she did not care, which is an entirely different thing and is, in fact, the only kind of courage that counts. The voice on the phone was patient. That was the first thing Emily noticed. Not angry, not threatening, not rushed. Patient, the way a man is patient when he has never once in his life needed to hurry because the world has always eventually moved at whatever pace he required. I've heard you've had an interesting afternoon, Gerald Foss said. Emily kept her voice level. I've had a busy Tuesday. I imagine so. A pause, not uncomfortable, calculated. You know, your father was a remarkable man. I always admired him. The whole town did. Don't, Emily said. Don't what? Don't say his name like you knew him, she said. You knew what he found. That's different, Ed. Across the table, Jack's eyes sharpened. He had his ear close to the phone. Cutter had gone completely still. The whole booth had that particular quality of silence that comes when everyone in it understands that the next 60 seconds matter. Miss Carter, Foss said, and his voice had not changed at all, not even slightly. I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're a direct person. You found some old documents. Incomplete documents, I'd wager full of context that's easy to misread. Property law in this county is complicated. Records get amended. Reassignments happen for legitimate reasons that aren't always obvious to people without legal training. Another pause. I'd hate to see a young woman destroy her future over a misunderstanding. Is that a threat? Emily said. It's concern, Foss said. Genuine concern. Here's what I'm concerned about, Emily said. 47 families. I'm concerned about all 47 of them. She watched Jack's expression shift into something that looked like approval. I'm concerned about Roy Pelham and whoever visited his house the week before his stroke. I'm concerned about what really happened in those canyon roads 5 years ago. The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. Shorter but denser. You should be careful, Foss said quietly. about the company you're keeping. I'll pass that along, Emily said, and she looked directly at Jack Donovan when she said it. Goodbye, Mr. Foss. She ended the call. Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Then Cutter exhaled through his nose and said, well, he knows. He already knew, Jack said. "Ja, must be my dad." He called within 2 hours of us arriving. He has someone in this town watching. He looked around the diner without turning his head, just his eyes a slow sweep that took in Pete at the kitchen window and Hank at the counter and Donna at the edge of the booth and the remaining 2 customers who had never left, an elderly couple who had been very quietly eating pie this entire time. We need to move faster than we planned. Emily was already photographing the next section of documents with her phone. Define faster. The documents need to be off-site tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Jack pulled out his own phone and started typing. I'm getting 2 of our people to drive the physical box to a location Foss has absolutely no connection to. Phoenix, a lawyer we trust. You have a lawyer, Cutter said with a tone that suggested this was mildly surprising. We have several lawyers, Jack said without looking up. What do you think happens when you've been writing for 40 years? Emily kept photographing. She worked through the sections methodically the way her father had organized them chronologically within each property case, cross-referenced by the names of the officials involved. Her hands were steady. Her mind was very clear in the way it only got when she had something specific to do, a quality she had inherited directly from Michael Carter, who had always said that panic was just energy that hadn't found its job yet. There's something in the 4th section, she said. Jack looked over. What? There's a name I don't recognize. It comes up 4 times across 3 different property cases. Always in the same role as a notary on the transfer documents. She showed him the page. Arthur Vines. Jack looked at the name, said nothing. Bridges, sitting at the far end of the booth, leaned in. Vines, that's the deputy county recorder. Has been for 11 years. He notarized documents he witnessed being falsified, Emily said. That's not just corruption. That's a paper trail with a name on it. That's a witness, Jack said. That's leverage, Cutter said. Emily looked at both of them. Where does Arthur Vines live? Emily, wow, Jack started. I'm not going to do anything reckless, she said. But if Foss just called me, then we have maybe 48 hours before he does something to make this harder. Arthur Vines notarized those documents. He knows what he saw. And if Foss is worried right now, if he's actually scared for the first time, then Vines might be scared too. And scared people either run or they talk. She looked at Jack steadily. I want to find him before Foss does. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Bridges. Bridges gave a small nod. Jack looked back at Emily. All right, he said, but not alone. I didn't say alone, Emily said. They had the box fully photographed and in the hands of 2 riders heading for Phoenix within the hour. The physical copies were gone, but the digital record existed now in 7 different places, and Emily had personally emailed a compressed file to an address Jack gave her, a journalist in Tucson named Sandra Ray Riquez, who had been covering development corruption in rural Arizona for 4 years, and had, according to Jack, been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation, with the particular hungry patience of someone who knows the story is out there somewhere and has simply not yet found the door. She had responded to the email in 11 minutes. Her response was 4 words. When can we talk? Emily wrote back. Give me 48 hours. Sandra Reyes wrote back, I'll be ready. Emily put her phone in her apron pocket. The diner had emptied out now. Pete had quietly put the closed sign on the door an hour ago, and Donna and Hank had both stayed sitting together at the counter drinking coffee and not pretending they weren't part of whatever this was anymore. The elderly couple who had been eating mighty had introduced themselves on their way out as Frank and Louise Mercer, and Louise had pressed Emily's hand and said very quietly, Gerald Foss foreclosed on my brother's ranch in 2014. Whatever you need from us, you call. She had left a phone number on a napkin. Emily had put it in her pocket next to Sandra Reyes's email. Every pocket she had was getting heavier. She told Jack about Sandra Reyes. He approved. He also told her something else, that in the 3 years they had been quietly working this investigation, they had located 2 of the other addresses on her father's list. One was a storage unit in Flagstaff with a second set of documents overlapping, but not identical to what was in the box. One was at the home of a man named Dale Coffey, a former employee of the title company in Phoenix. that had processed the fraudulent transfers, who had kept personal records of the transactions he had been asked to process and had been too afraid to come forward, but had also crucially never destroyed them. "We've talked to Dale twice," Jack said. "He's willing. He's been willing for 2 years. He just needed to know it was actually going somewhere before he put himself out there." "Tell him it's going somewhere," Emily said. "I already texted him," Jack said. "He texted back one word." "What word?" Jack showed her the phone. The word was "finally." Emily felt something loosen in her chest just slightly. Not relief exactly, more like confirmation. Like the first real indication that the shape of what she was trying to do was actually achievable and not just necessary. Then her phone buzzed again. Different number this time. Not unknown, a local number, but not one saved in her contacts. She answered it. "Is this Emily Carter?" A man's voice, older, shaking slightly at the edges. "Yes," she said. "My name is Arthur Vines." A pause in which she could hear him breathing. "I think you know why I'm calling." Emily stood up straighter. Across the table, Jack had seen her expression change. He leaned in. She held the phone slightly away so he could hear. "Mr. Vines," she said carefully, "how did you get this number?" "Gerald called me 20 minutes ago," Vines said. "He told me someone had found Michael Carter's documents. He told me to sit tight and not talk to anyone." Another pause. "I've been sitting tight for 5 years, Miss Carter. I watched what happened to your father. I've been watching what happened to this county for a decade. And I am 71 years old and I am tired." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "Are you safe right now?" she said. "I'm at my daughter's house," he said. "Gerald doesn't know I'm here, but I don't know how long that lasts." His voice dropped. "I have records, my own records, separate from whatever your father kept. I documented every transaction I was asked to notarize that I knew was wrong. Every one. Because I was a coward who didn't stop it, but I was not enough of a coward to pretend it wasn't happening." "Mr. Vines," Emily said, "I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not open your door for anyone until I call you back. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. And then, "Miss Carter, I'm sorry for all of it. I'm very sorry." Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. "I know," she said. "Stay put." She ended the call. The booth erupted. Not loudly, these were not loud people, but in the compressed, efficient way of people who understand urgency. Jack was already on his phone. Cutter was on his feet. Bridges was talking to Salas in a low voice at the far end of the table. "We need someone at Vines's daughter's house within the hour," Jack said. "Physical presence. He is now a witness with records, and Foss knows something is moving." He looked at Cutter. "Take Bridges and 2 others. Don't go in heavy. Park down the street and watch." Cutter was already moving. "Jack," Emily said. He looked at her. "I'm coming." "Emily." "He called me," she said. "He apologized to me. He's 71 years old and he's scared, and he took a risk making that call, and I am not sending strangers to his daughter's door. I'm going." She picked up her keys from the counter. "You can follow me, or you can try to stop me." Jack looked at her for the length of a breath. "Pete," he said loudly enough to carry to the kitchen. Pete appeared at the pass-through. "Yeah. Can you lock up tonight?" Pete looked at Emily. "Been locking up this place for 12 years, he said. "Go." They drove in a loose convoy, Emily's truck leading 4 bikes behind her, spaced casually enough to not look like a convoy. Arthur Vine's daughter's house was on the eastern edge of town, a quiet street, the kind where people kept their porch lights on. Emily pulled up 2 houses down, the way Jack had told her to, and Cutter and his riders went past and around the block and positioned themselves without appearing to position themselves, which was a skill that apparently came with experience. She called Vines. He answered on the first ring. "It's Emily Carter. I'm outside. Don't turn on any extra lights. Just come to your front door." 30 seconds later, the door opened, and Arthur Vines appeared, a small man thinner than she had expected, with the look of someone who had been carrying a weight so long he had forgotten what he looked like without it. His daughter stood behind him, a woman in her 40s with her arms crossed and an expression that was simultaneously protective and deeply relieved that someone had finally shown up. Emily walked up to the porch, alone. She had told Jack to stay with the bikes, and he had agreed with the expression of a man who was agreeing because he recognized it was correct, not because he liked it. Vines looked at her. His eyes were wet. "You look like him," he said. "You have his eyes." Emily did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Can we come inside?" They sat in Vines's daughter's living room. Emily Vines and his daughter, whose name was Carol, same as Emily's mother, which struck Emily as the kind of coincidence that felt like something more, but probably wasn't. Vines had a cardboard box on the coffee table in front of him. He had brought it from home earlier in the week, he said, because he had been feeling it coming. That was how he put it. "I've been feeling it coming." He opened the box. His records were meticulous. Handwritten logbooks, one for each year going back 11 years, with every notarization he had performed, recorded in full date parties, document type, and in a separate column in red ink, a code. He explained the code. When a transaction was standard and legitimate, the code column was blank. When something about it had troubled him, a party he'd never met, a document that had been pre-signed instructions that seemed designed to minimize what he witnessed, he had written a small red R. When he was certain something was wrong, he had written a red W. There were 53 red W entries. Emily picked up the first logbook. The first red W was dated 9 years ago. The property involved was a 60-acre ranch belonging to a family named Gutierrez. The transfer document had been pre-signed by someone purporting to be Ramon Gutierrez. But Arthur Vines had written in the margin in his careful old-fashioned script, "Subject not present, signature pre-applied, instructed not to require presence. R. Gutierrez confirmed by phone only per Gerald F." "Gerald F.," Emily said. "He called me personally," Vines said. "For the first 3 years, he called me personally for every one of them. After that, he had his assistant handle the routine ones and only called for the complicated cases." He looked at his hands. "I knew what I was doing. I told myself the legal technicalities were not my responsibility to sort out, that I was just a notary, that the real wrongdoing was somewhere else." He paused. "That's what cowardice sounds like when it's trying to sound reasonable." Emily looked at the logbook. Then she looked at Vines. "Did you know my father had found this?" "Not until after he disappeared," Vines said. "Gerald told me. He said Michael Carter had been gathering information that could cause serious problems and that the situation had been resolved. He said it in that way, resolved. He wanted me to know what resolved meant." His voice was steady, but his hands were not. "I understood, and I sat with that for 5 years." Emily was quiet. "I have grandchildren," Vines said. 3 of them. The oldest one is 8. And last week she asked me what I do for work because she didn't really understand it, and I tried to explain it, and the whole time she was looking at me with these completely trusting eyes, and I thought." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. "I thought, I cannot look at her again if I don't do this." Carol Vines put her hand over her father's. Emily put the logbook down. She looked at Arthur Vines for a moment, this small, frightened, careful man who had spent 11 years writing red W's in a logbook that nobody was supposed to ever see, because he could not stop what was happening, but also could not fully pretend it wasn't happening. The particular hell of the person who knows and does not act, who keeps the record, because keeping the record is the only fragment of integrity he can manage. "Your records combined with my father's documents," Emily said, "and Dale Coffey's records from the title company." "Dale kept records," Vines said. "Dale kept records," Emily confirmed. For the first time since she had sat down, Arthur Vines's expression changed. Something in it collapsed and rebuilt at the same time. "Then it's actually enough," he said. Not a question. He knew what he was looking at. Is that actually enough to take this all the way?" "Yes," Emily said. "It is." She called Jack from the porch, told him what they had. She heard him relay it to someone else, heard the shift in the background voices. Then he said, "Sandra Reyes wants to talk tonight. Not in 48 hours. Tonight. She's been on Foss's case for 2 years, and she says what you just described is the missing piece she's been waiting for." "Tonight," Emily said. "Are you sure you're ready for this to move that fast?" Emily looked back through the window at Arthur Vines sitting in his daughter's living room with his logbooks on the coffee table and his daughter's hand over his. She thought about Dale Coffey in Phoenix and his one-word text. She thought about Louise Mercer's phone number on a napkin in her pocket and the 47 families in her father's documents and Roy Pelham in his care facility in Prescott, who had found the courage to talk and paid for it. She thought about her father standing outside a building in Mineral Wells Gray at the Temples waiting for someone to finish it. "I've been ready for 5 years," she said. "Make the call." The meeting with Sandra Reyes happened at 11 that night in a back booth of a diner in the next town over because Emily's diner was compromised now, and they all knew it. Sandra Reyes was 43, compact, with the particular focused energy of someone who had been chasing something important for a long time and could finally feel the ground under her feet. She had brought a colleague, a younger man named Torres, who handled the digital documentation side of things, and she had done her homework because she arrived with a folder of her own containing 2 years of research on Gerald Foss that overlapped with and corroborated the documents Emily had, confirming independently that what they had was not a misreading of complicated property law, but a deliberate, sustained criminal enterprise. "This is real," Sandra said 30 minutes into the meeting, and she said it not for their benefit, but for her own, the particular way reporters say something when they stop looking for the hole in it and start believing it. "This is absolutely real." "I know it's real," Emily said. "You understand what happens when this publishes," Sandra said. "There's no walking it back. Foss will come at it hard. His lawyers will challenge everything. There will be an extended, very ugly fight." "I know," Emily said, "and your name will be on it. You personally. The story is inseparable from you finding that box today." "I know that too." Sandra Reyes looked at her across the table. "How old are you?" 24, Emily said. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father found this. You're going to finish it. That's the story too, you understand. That's the part people will actually remember." Emily shook her head slightly. "The part people need to remember is the 47 families." Sandra looked at her. Something in her expression settled. "All right," she said. "Then that's what we lead with." They worked until 2 in the morning. Torres built a secure archive of everything: Emily's photographs, Vines's logbooks, Coffey's records, Sandra's 2 years of independent research, organized and cross-referenced and stored in a way that meant even if something happened to any one person in that room, the documentation would survive. Sandra outlined a publication timeline. The article would take 72 hours to write and verify. It would go to the editorial team for review. It would publish within the week, barring legal intervention. "Can Foss get an injunction?" Emily asked. "He'll try," Sandra said, "and he won't get it, because this isn't speculation. This is documented fact, and he knows it, and the moment he tries to legally suppress it, he makes it 3 times the story." "He'll know publication is coming before it happens," Jack said. "Yes," Sandra said. "That's the dangerous window," Jack said. "Yes," Sandra said again. She looked at Jack directly. "How long can you keep people in Red Creek?" "As long as we need to," Jack said. Sandra nodded slowly. "Then we have a plan." They drove back to Red Creek at 2:30 in the morning. Emily's truck, Jack's bike alongside. The town was completely dark, which was normal for 2:30 on a Tuesday night in a place where most people were up before sunrise. She pulled into the diner parking lot. The closed sign was still on the door. Pete had left the kitchen light on the way her father always used to do, a habit Pete had absorbed over 12 years of working for him, the light that said someone would be back in the morning. Emily sat in her truck for a moment after Jack pulled up beside her and cut the engine. She looked at the diner, at the light in the kitchen, at the framed menu visible through the front window, the same menu her father had designed and printed and laminated 22 years ago. "You okay?" Jack said through the window. "I don't know," Emily said honestly. "I think so. I think I will be." Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He would be proud of you. I know I don't know you well enough to say that with authority, but I knew him a little, and I can say it anyway." Emily looked at the kitchen light. "I know," she said softly. "I can feel it." She got out of the truck. She walked to the diner door. She unlocked it and went inside and stood in the empty room that smelled like coffee and grease and 22 years of her family's life. And she looked at her father's photograph on the wall behind the register, and she said quietly into the empty room the same way she always did, "I found it, Dad. We're going to finish it." The kitchen light hummed. And somewhere in a town called Mineral Wells, a man who had been waiting for 5 years had no way of knowing that the waiting was almost over. But it was. Emily slept 3 hours that night, not because she couldn't sleep longer, but because at 5:15 in the morning, her phone rang, and it was Jack, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not alarm exactly, but the compressed, controlled energy of someone managing something that required immediate attention. "Someone broke into the diner," but he said. She was already sitting up. "When?" "Sometime between 3 and 5. Pete drove by on his way to the early fish market. He goes every Wednesday, and he saw the back door was open. He called me instead of you because he didn't want to scare you." A pause. I told him that was the wrong call and that you'd want to know everything immediately. Is Pete okay? Pete is fine. He didn't go in. He waited outside and called me. Are you there now? Two of our guys are outside. I'm 3 minutes out. Emily was already dressed. Don't go in until I get there. She beat him by 45 seconds. The back door of the diner had been forced, not dramatically, not broken down, but opened with a tool carefully by someone who knew what they were doing. Emily stood at the threshold and looked in without touching anything and did a slow visual inventory of what she could see from the doorway. The kitchen looked mostly undisturbed. The dining room was harder to see from this angle. She went around to the front window and looked through the glass. The register was untouched. The booths were undisturbed, but the corner booth, her booth, where they had spread the documents yesterday afternoon, had been gone through. The seat cushions were pulled back. The table had been wiped, not cleaned, searched, someone running their hands under the table surface, looking for anything taped beneath it. Jack appeared at her shoulder. He looked through the window. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They didn't find anything because there's nothing here to find." I know, Emily said, but that's not the point. What's the point? The point is that he sent someone into my father's diner in the middle of the night, she said. Her voice was flat. The point is that he wanted me to wake up and find this and understand what it means. It means he's scared, Jack said. It means he's done being patient, Emily said. She took out her phone and called Sandra Reyes. It was 5:22 in the morning. Sandra answered on the second ring. Talk to me. He had someone go through the diner last night, Emily said. No documents to find, but he doesn't know that. He's escalating. How fast can you get me everything you have access to for verification? Sandra said. Her voice was fully awake, the voice of someone who had been running on readiness for days. I want to move the publication timeline up. How far up? 48 hours becomes 24, Sandra said. I've been working all night. Torres has been working all night. The core story is written. I need final verification on 4 documents and a statement from you on the record. You have it, Emily said, all of it. Then we're publishing tomorrow evening, Sandra said. 6 o'clock. It goes up on the digital edition first. Then the print cycle picks it up Thursday morning. Emily looked at the back door of her father's diner. Do it, she said. She called Arthur Vines next. He answered on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. She told him about the break-in. There was a long silence. Then he said, he's going to come after me too. I know, Emily said. Are you still at your daughter's? Yes. Stay there. Don't answer your door. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't know. Jack is going to send someone to your street. She paused. 24 hours, Mr. Vines. That's all we need. Another silence. Blah, blah. Then Vines said something she didn't expect. He said, Michael told me once, this was years before any of this. We weren't even friendly, really. Just acquaintance, he said. The thing about doing the right thing late is that it still counts. He said better late than complicit. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I've thought about that a lot. Emily closed her eyes for a second. He was right, she said. Stay safe. She hung up and turned to Jack. I need to make one more call, she said, and I need you to not say anything while I make it. Jack looked at her steadily. Okay. She scrolled to her contacts, found the number she almost never called because calling it meant acknowledging a distance she had never fully accepted. She pressed call. It rang 4 times, and then her mother's voice came on sleep rough and immediately alert in the way mothers become alert when their children call at strange hours. Emily, what's wrong at Mom? Emily said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down first. She heard the sound of her mother sitting up in bed. You're scaring me. I'm okay, Emily said. I'm fine. I'm safe. She took a breath. Mom, I think Dad is alive. The silence that followed was the longest silence Emily had ever lived through. It lasted maybe 6 seconds. It felt like a season. Emily. Her mother's voice had gone very careful. The voice of someone managing hope that has been burned before. What are you saying? I'm saying that yesterday a Hells Angels road captain walked into the diner wearing Dad's bracelet, the one we gave him, and he told me that Dad gave it to him personally 4 months after the flood. She kept her voice steady, calm, factual, because if she let the emotion in right now, she would lose the ability to say what needed to be said. I'm saying there's a photograph from 7 months ago of a man who could be him. I'm saying we found his documents, the ones he hid, and they prove that someone in this county had a reason to want him gone. And I'm saying we are 24 hours from making this public. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound of something enormous moving inside a person who has spent 5 years building careful walls to keep that enormous thing contained. Carol. Jack had taken the phone gently from Emily's hand without her quite realizing it. He said it quietly and firmly, the way he said everything. This is Jack Donovan. I knew your husband. He saved the lives of 3 men I consider brothers. I am telling you, woman to woman. He stopped, started again. I am telling you as someone who sat across from Michael Carter and looked him in the eye that we have reason to believe. It is not certain, but it is real. A pause. Your daughter needs you to trust what she's done here, and I think you already do. A very long pause. Then Emily heard her mother say, "Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I'm getting in the car right now." Jack held the phone back out. Emily took it. "Mom, don't argue with me," Carol Carter said, and she sounded for the first time in 5 years like herself. "I'll be there by noon." The next 24 hours moved in the compressed, slightly unreal way that hours move when something enormous is approaching and everyone involved can feel it, but nobody can speed it up or slow it down. Emily opened the diner at 7 because closing it would signal something was wrong and they needed another 12 hours of looking normal. Pete came in and looked at the forced back door and looked at Emily and said nothing, just went to the kitchen and started the grill, which was its own kind of statement. Hank Briggs was in at 6:15 before she even unlocked the front door. He knocked on the glass and she let him in, and he sat at the counter and she poured his coffee, and he said without preamble, "I made some calls this morning." Emily looked at him. "I've been ranching in this county for 51 years, he said. "I know people, people who don't talk much, people who've been sitting on things they didn't think anyone could do anything about." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I called 8 of them this morning, told them something was happening and that if they had anything relevant to a property case in this county, they needed to be ready to share it." He paused. 6 of them said yes without asking what it was about. The other 2 said yes after I told them Gerald Foss was involved. Emily set the coffee pot down. "Hank, I'm 73, he said. "I don't have time for patience anymore." By 9 o'clock, Donna Whitfield had arrived with a list of 4 families she had personally contacted whose children she had taught and whose property situations she had always found troubling. All 4 families had agreed to speak on the record. One of them, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, whose family ranch appeared in Arthur Vines's very first Red W entry, said she had documentation of her own, that she had never known what to do with the original deed to the property, showing her father's legitimate ownership, which directly contradicted the transfer document Foss's company had filed. Sandra Reyes drove up from Tucson to collect Rosa Gutierrez's documentation in person. She arrived at 11:30 and sat in the corner booth for an hour with Rosa and Rosa's adult son and a voice recorder, and when she came back to the counter, her expression was the expression of someone carrying something they know matters. "The Gutierrez piece is going in as its own section," she told Emily. "It's the clearest single case. A family that owned their land outright for 2 generations and lost it through a document that was fraudulently notarized. It's concrete, it's human, and it's devastating." "It's 47 families," Emily said. "The Gutierrez case is the door," Sandra said. "Once readers walk through that door, the 47 are what they find on the other side." Carol Carter arrived at 12:40. Emily saw her mother's car pull into the parking lot, and she walked out the front door without her apron and met her in the parking lot, and her mother got out of the car, and they held each other for a long time without speaking. Carol Carter smelled like the lavender hand lotion she had always used, and her arms were thinner than Emily remembered, and she was crying before she even got fully out of the car, the kind of crying that has been stored for years and finally finds its exit. "Tell me everything," Carol said into Emily's shoulder. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." They sat in the corner booth for an hour. Emily told her all of it. Carol listened with her hands folded on the table and her eyes very bright and very steady, and she asked precise questions at precise moments, the kind of questions that revealed a woman who had been processing and analyzing and holding her grief with far more structure than she ever let on. When Emily finished, Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The photograph, can I see it?" Emily showed her the photograph on her phone. Carol Carter took the phone in both hands. She looked at it for a very long time. Her expression went through several things Emily could not name. Then she set the phone down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you grip it any harder. That's him, Carol said, flat, certain, not a question. That's how he stands. He thinks nobody notices that he favors the right leg, but I always noticed. She pressed her fingers briefly over her eyes. He's alive. We think so, Emily said. He's alive, Carol said again, and this time it was not a repetition. It was a decision. The decision to believe it and carry it as truth until proven otherwise, because the alternative was something she had already lived for 5 years, and she was not willing to live it one more day if there was any other option. At 2 in the afternoon, Jack came into the diner and sat at the counter and asked for coffee and waited until Pete was out of earshot. Then he said, "We have a problem." Emily looked at him. "One of the county officials named in your father's documents, a man named Commissioner Dale Harrigan, he filed an emergency motion this morning to have the county recorder's office sealed, pending a routine audit review. It's procedurally thin, but it gives Foss a window to tamper with the official records before anyone can access them officially." Emily thought fast. "Does Sandra know?" "I called her 10 minutes ago. She's already working with a media lawyer on whether the emergency motion can be challenged. But the county judge who received the motion is friendly with Foss," Emily said. "Has golfed with Foss 17 times in the last 3 years, yes," Jack said, "which we know because Bridges spent the morning being very thorough." "Can we get around this official records?" Emily said. "We have the copies from the box. We have Vines's logbooks. We have Coffey's records from the title company." "The private documentation is solid," Jack said. "But if Foss can muddy the official record enough to create a dispute about authenticity, then he buys himself time and doubt," Emily said. "And doubt is all he needs." "Yes." Emily was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Arthur Vines is the deputy county recorder." Jack looked at her. "He has official access," Emily said. "Right now, today, before that emergency motion takes full effect, he can access and certify copies of the official records himself, as a county employee, as the deputy recorder." She looked at Jack. "Call him." Jack stared at her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. He found Vines's number. He dialed and put the phone on the counter between them. It rang twice. Vines answered. "Mr. Vines," Jack said, "Emily needs to ask you something." Emily leaned toward the phone. "Can you get to the recorder's office in the next 2 hours and pull certified copies of the transfer records we identified last night, official copies with your certification seal?" A pause, then Vines said, "Harrigan filed a sealing motion this morning." "I know. Does it take effect immediately, or does it go into effect upon judicial approval?" Another pause. Longer. She could hear him thinking. "Upon judicial approval," he said slowly. "The judge hasn't signed off yet. It was filed this morning. It would typically be reviewed by end of business today," Emily said, "which means you have a window right now." "Emily," Vines's voice had gone very careful, "what I'm describing would be pulling official records before a sealing order takes effect. That is technically within my authority as deputy recorder. But Foss will know, Harrigan will know, the moment I walk into that office today." "I know," Emily said. "I know what it means for you." A silence that stretched long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then Arthur Vines said, "My granddaughter's 8 years old." He said it the same way he had said it the night before, like a compass bearing, like the fixed point he was navigating from. "I'll be at the office in 40 minutes. Emily picked up the phone from the counter. "Jack is sending 2 people to park outside the building while you're in there. You go in, you pull the records, you walk out, and you go directly back to your daughter's house. Don't stop anywhere." "All right," Vines said. "Mr. Vines," Emily paused. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said, and the line went quiet. He was in and out of the county recorder's office in 51 minutes. One of Jack's riders watched from outside and texted Jack a running account. Vines entered at 2:47. He pulled 12 sets of certified document copies. He was approached by a junior staff member at 3:19 who asked what he was working on. He said routine verification ahead of the audit review, which was not even technically a lie. He walked out at 3:38 with a manila envelope under his arm and got into his car and drove directly to his daughter's house, and the emergency sealing motion was signed by the judge at 4:15, by which point Arthur Vines and his certified copies were already in Jack Donovan's hands. And those copies were already being photographed and uploaded by Torres from the back of a car 2 blocks from the recorder's office. At 4:45, Sandra Reyes called Emily. "We're locked," she said. "Everything is verified. Official records, private documentation, witness statements, independent corroboration. It's airtight. The editorial team has cleared it." A pause that was not hesitation, but was the space a person takes when they are about to say something that cannot be unsaid. "Emily, this is going to be a very big story, not just county, state, possibly national pickup within 48 hours of publication." Emily was standing in the kitchen of the diner. Her mother was in the dining room talking quietly with Donna Whitfield. Pete was at the grill even though they were technically closed because Pete apparently processed stress by cooking, which Emily had always found privately comforting. "I know," Emily said. "Are you ready for that?" "My father was ready for it 5 years ago," Emily said. "I think I can manage." The article published at 6:02 p.m. Sandra had sent Emily a link 2 minutes before it went live, and Emily had opened it on her phone and read the headline and felt something she could not entirely name. Something that was grief and relief and rage and pride all compressed into a single feeling that sat in the center of her chest like a stone that had finally found its place. The headline read, "15 Years of Fraud, How One Developer Stole Land from 47 Arizona Families and What One Man Found Before He Disappeared." Within 20 minutes, the article had been shared 400 times. Within an hour, the Arizona Republic had picked it up with a link. Within 2 hours, an investigative reporter from the Phoenix ABC affiliate called Sandra asking for a television interview. Within 3 hours, the state attorney general's office had issued a statement saying they were aware of the published report and were reviewing the documentation. Gerald Foss issued a statement through his lawyer at 8 p.m., calling the article a collection of mischaracterized records and motivated falsehoods. It was the statement of a man who had run out of better options. It was the statement of a man losing. Emily was in the corner booth with her mother when she read the statement. Carol Carter read it over her shoulder. Then she said quietly, "He's afraid." "Yes," Emily said. "Would," Carol said. At 9 p.m., Hank Briggs walked into the diner with 6 people Emily didn't know. They were older, most of them. Ranchers and retired workers, and one woman who introduced herself as Maria Gutierrez, Rosa's mother, 81 years old, who had driven 40 minutes to be here because she had seen the article online and her grandson had read it to her, and she had asked to be brought to the diner where it had started. She sat down at the counter with the precision of a woman who has earned the right to sit wherever she wants, and she looked at Emily, and she said in a voice that carried decades of dignity and loss and something now that was edging towards something else, "Is it real? Is it finally real?" "It's real," Emily said. Maria Gutierrez nodded once. Then she looked at the photograph of Michael Carter on the wall behind the register, and she said, "God bless that man." Emily could not speak for a moment. She looked at her father's photograph, at his eyes, which were her eyes, which was something she had always known, but that felt different. Right now, felt like a connection that crossed whatever distance currently existed between them. "He's not gone," Emily said. Quietly to the room, to her mother, to herself, "He's not gone, and we're going to find him." Jack came in at 9:30 and sat at the counter and ordered coffee, and for the first time all day, he looked like something had released in him, some tension he had been carrying since he walked through the door the previous afternoon with 50 riders at his back. He drank his coffee and looked around the room at Maria Gutierrez, at the counter at Hank Briggs, and his 6 new arrivals at Carol Carter and Donna Whitfield, in the booth at Pete, visible through the pass-through, still moving around the kitchen, and his expression was something Emily had not seen on him before. "What?" she said. "Your father said something to me," Jack said. "That night on the phone before the flood. He said the reason he was doing all of it, the documents, the copies, the hiding of evidence, wasn't because he thought he could bring it down by himself. He said one person alone can find the truth, but they can't make it stick. He said you need enough people standing in the same place at the same time." He looked around the room again. He was right. Emily followed his gaze around the room. At the people who had come tonight because something had broken open in their town, and they had decided each of them separately, and then all of them together that they were done being quiet about it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She answered. Silence. Then a sound that was not quite breathing and not quite not breathing. Then a voice rough, quieter than she remembered it, older, in a way that 5 years makes a voice older, that said just two words. M. Her hand gripped the phone so hard, her knuckles went white. Nobody in the diner moved. Dad, she said. And the word came out of her like something that had been waiting to be said for 5 years, like something that had been held at the back of her throat every day through the grief and the fighting and the keeping the lights on and the talking to his photograph at 2 in the morning. And it was the smallest word in the world, and it was the largest thing she had ever said. I saw the article, her father said. His voice was shaking. Baby, I saw the article. Emily Carter sat down on the floor of her father's diner. Not dramatically, not as a collapse. She just sat down because standing required energy she was currently using for other things, and the floor was there, and it was enough. Are you safe, she said. Yes, a breath. Are you down? Yes, she said. Jack is here. A lot of people are here. A pause, then very quietly, Jack. He's been looking for you, Emily said. A lot of people have been looking for you. I'm sorry, her father said. And the two words carried 5 years of weight, the weight of a man who chose his family's safety over his own presence, who sat in a town called Mineral Wells watching the world from a distance and waiting for something he could not do alone to somehow get done. I am so sorry. Don't, she said. Not yet. We'll do that part in person. She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her eyes. Where are you? And the room waited. And Carol Carter, who had heard her daughter's voice say that one word had crossed the room and was kneeling on the floor next to her daughter, and she took the phone and held it so they could both hear. And she said the name she had not said in 5 years in the particular way that only she said it, and the sound that came back through the phone was the sound of a man who had been holding something enormous and intact for 5 years and was only now finally beginning to let it down. It's over, Emily said. Come home. Outside Red Creek was quiet in the way it always was at 9:30 on a Wednesday night. But something was different tonight. There were lights on in houses where people had read an article and were sitting with it. There were phones being passed across kitchen tables. There were conversations happening that had been not happening for years. In Hank Briggs' address book, there were 6 people who had come tonight and 30 more who would hear about it by morning. In Donna Whitfield's class roster, there were 31 children who would grow up in a county where the truth had been spoken aloud finally by enough people at the same time to make it stick. And in the Red Creek family diner, on the floor of the corner booth, with her mother's arm around her and the phone in her hand and her father's voice on the other end of the line, Emily Carter did not make any grand speeches. She did not summarize or explain or wrap it up neatly. She just stayed on the floor and held the phone and talked to her father, and the kitchen light was on, and the diner smelled like coffee and grease, and 22 years of her family's life. And outside the window, the motorcycles were still in the parking lot, and none of it was over yet. Not really, not in the legal sense, not in the sense of courts and hearings and charges to be filed and families to be made whole. But something fundamental had changed direction tonight, the way a river changes direction slowly and then all at once and then permanently. And the man who had disappeared was coming home. Michael Carter drove into Red Creek on a Thursday morning 6 days after the article published. He drove a truck that was not his own, a borrowed vehicle, brown, unremarkable, and he came alone because he had insisted on that, had told Jack in the phone call 2 nights after the first one that he needed to come back the same way he had left, which was under his own power and without anyone managing it for him. Jack had argued. Emily had told Jack to let him have it. Jack had said, "You're exactly like your father, you know that." And Emily had said, "I know." And that had been the end of the argument. She was standing outside the diner when he turned into the parking lot. She had not planned to be standing outside. She had planned to be inside doing something normal, being busy, not standing in the parking lot like a person who had been watching the road since 6 in the morning. But when the brown truck turned the corner and she recognized the way it slowed down the particular hesitation of a man who was approaching something so enormous, he needed an extra second to prepare for it. She had put down the coffee pot she was holding and walked out the front door, and she was standing in the parking lot when he got out of the truck. He was grayer than the photograph, thinner. He moved carefully in the way of someone who has been living cautiously for a long time and hasn't fully remembered yet how to move like a man who is allowed to be seen. He stood by the driver's door, and he looked at the diner, at the sign at the front window, at the menu board visible through the glass, at all the things that had stayed exactly as he left them, because his daughter had refused to change a single one, and his face did something complicated and private that Emily gave him the full space to have. Then he looked at her. She crossed the parking lot and he met her halfway, and they held on to each other in the way that people hold on when they have been practicing the moment for 5 years in their heads. And the reality of it is simultaneously exactly what they imagined and nothing like it at all. He was solid and real, and he smelled the same, the particular combination of coffee and something clean and outdoor that she had not smelled in 5 years and had not realized until this second that she had been missing with her entire body. "I've got you," he said into her hair. His voice was rough. I've got you." "You're late," she said, "by 5 years. You're extremely late." He made a sound that was almost a laugh and held her tighter. Carol Carter came out of the diner 30 seconds later. She had been inside because she had made a decision that morning to let Emily have the first moment, which was the kind of selfless, precise decision that Carol Carter made and never mentioned and never asked to be acknowledged for. She walked across the parking lot, and Michael turned and saw her, and whatever was left of the composure he had been managing evaporated completely. He opened his other arm, and she came into it, and the three of them stood in the parking lot of the Red Creek Family Diner on a Thursday morning, and none of them said anything for a long time because there was nothing that needed to be said that wasn't already being said. Pete appeared in the diner doorway, looked at the three of them, went back inside. 30 seconds later, the smell of the grill starting came through the open door, which was Pete's way of saying, "Welcome home," in the only language he was fully comfortable with. Michael Carter sat in the corner booth for 2 hours that morning with Emily and Carol in either side of him and told them everything. He told it straight through from the beginning, from the tax record that started it all through the calls to Jack through the flood, and here his voice got quiet in a particular way, the way voices get quiet around things that still carry physical memory to what had actually happened in those canyon roads. A car had run him off the road, deliberately. He had gone into a drainage ditch and hit his head badly enough that he had been confused and in pain for hours. By the time he had gotten himself out and walked to a road, he had understood two things with complete clarity. First, that someone had tried to kill him. Second, that if he walked back into Red Creek alive, they would try again, and next time they might not miss, and next time Emily or Carol might be in the way. "So you let us think you were dead," Carol said. Her voice was even. She had processed 5 years of grief, and she was processing it again now in a different way, which was the grief of understanding why, which was simultaneously more painful and more bearable than the grief of not knowing. "I let everyone think it," Michael said, "because if you showed any sign that you knew, it would have put you in danger." He looked at her. "Carol, I know what I took from you. I know what I took from both of you. There is no version of this where I get to say it was simple or where I get to ask you to make it easy for me." Well, he paused. "But I need you to know that there was not one day, not 1 hour that I didn't—" "I know," Carol said. She put her hand over his. "Michael, I know." He looked at her hand over his, and something in his face settled the way a thing settles when it has been bracing against a weight for so long that the moment the weight lifts, it takes a moment to believe the lifting is real. "There are things that have to happen," Emily said. She said it gently, but she said it because she was her father's daughter, and she had learned from him that some things need to be moved through and not around. "The state AG's office wants a statement from you. Sandra Rickes wants to add your account to the follow-up article, and there are 47 families who deserve to hear from you directly." Michael looked at her. "I know," he said. "I know all of that, and I'll do all of it." He looked at the diner around him, at the counter and the register, and his photograph on the wall at Pete visible through the pass-through, at the Tuesday special chalkboard that still listed the same chicken fried steak it had listed for 22 years. "But first," he said, "can I just sit here for a few minutes in this booth with my family?" He looked at Emily. "Is that okay?" Emily Carter looked at her father sitting in the corner booth of the diner he had built alive and present, and returned, looking at her with eyes that were her eyes, with the particular expression of a man who has been away for 5 years and is looking at something ordinary as though it is the most extraordinary thing he has ever seen, because absence teaches you that thing, teaches you that ordinary is always extraordinary if you've ever had it taken away. Yeah, Dad, she said. That's okay. They gave him 20 minutes. Then the work began. The state attorney general's office had opened a formal investigation within 48 hours of the article publishing. Michael's statement, recorded in Sandra Reyes's presence at the diner table on Thursday afternoon on the record with a lawyer Jack had arranged present, added the final dimension the investigation needed: the account of the man who had originally found the fraud and documented it, and who could speak firsthand to the attempt on his life in those canyon roads 5 years ago. Sandra published the follow-up article Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. Gerald Foss's lawyer issued 3 statements in 4 days, each one less confident than the last. The third one contained the sentence, "Our client is cooperating with all relevant authorities," which was the kind of sentence that lawyers write when they have run out of better sentences. Commissioner Dale Harrigan, who had filed the emergency sealing motion, resigned from his position on Friday afternoon, citing personal health reasons, which nobody believed and nobody was required to pretend to believe. The judge who had signed the sealing motion recused himself from any related proceedings 12 hours after the follow-up article named him as a regular golf partner of Foss's. A circuit court judge from Maricopa County was appointed to oversee the case. Arthur Vines gave his full formal statement on Friday morning. He sat in the county's official interview room with his certified copies in front of him and his logbooks beside them, and he went through 11 years of Red W entries one by one with the methodical precision of a man who had been preparing for this conversation in his head for a very long time. The interview lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, the investigator across the table from him said, "Mr. Vines, I want to be direct with you. Your voluntary cooperation combined with the documentation you preserved is the backbone of this case." Vines had looked at the investigator and said, "I should have done it 10 years ago." The investigator had said, "Yes, but you did it now." And Vines had nodded once and gathered his materials and walked out of the building and called his daughter and asked her to bring his granddaughter to dinner because he wanted to see her. Dale Coffey flew in from Phoenix on Saturday and gave a statement on Saturday afternoon and handed over the original records he had been keeping for 9 years in a fireproof safe in his home office. His hands were shaking when he carried them into the building. When he came out, they were not. Rosa Gutierrez and her mother Maria filed an official claim for the recovery of their family's 60-acre ranch on Monday morning. Theirs was the first of what would eventually become 31 formal recovery claims filed across the county over the following 6 weeks. The public hearing was set for 3 weeks out. The county civic center, which held 400 people, sold out in an afternoon, which was a strange word, sold out for a public hearing. But that was what happened. They had to open the overflow room. They had to set up speakers in the parking lot. People came from surrounding counties because the article had spread and because the story was the kind of story that people who have spent years watching powerful people be protected by the systems that are supposed to hold them accountable needed to hear, needed to see, play out in real time, needed to confirm was actually possible. Emily Carter sat at the front of the Civic Center that evening beside her father and her mother, with Jack Donovan and Cutter and Bridges and Salas in the row behind them, with Hank Briggs and Donna Whitfield beside them, with Arthur Vines 3 rows back, looking smaller and lighter simultaneously, with Rosa and Maria Gutierrez on the other side of the room holding hands with Sandra Reyes in the press section with her notebook open, and Torres beside her with a camera. The room was full of people Emily recognized and people she didn't, all of them there because something real was happening and they had decided to be present for it. The evidence was presented over 4 hours. The testimony was heard. The documented cases were laid out one by one, 47 of them, each with a name and a family and a parcel of land and a paper trail that now in this room in front of these people could no longer be misread or recharacterized or buried in procedural language. Gerald Foss was not in the room. His lawyer was. He sat in the second row and did not take notes, and his expression did not change, which was the expression of a man who has accepted something he cannot change and is managing the acceptance in real time. When the chair of the proceedings asked if anyone from the public wished to speak, 11 people stood up. Emily had not planned to be one of them. She had told Sandra she would let the documentation speak for itself. She had told Jack she had no speech prepared. She had told her father on Thursday afternoon that she was not going to be the kind of person who makes this about themselves. But when the 11th person sat down, she found herself standing. She did not have notes. She stood at the microphone in the center of the Civic Center with 400 people in front of her and her father visible in the front row, and she looked at the room for a moment, at all of it, at the shape of what had happened in the last 3 weeks and the 5 years before it, at the particular extraordinary fact that this room was full, and she said what was true. My father built a diner in this town 27 years ago because he believed in feeding people, she said. That's not a metaphor. He literally believed that if you fed people, if you gave them a warm meal and a decent cup of coffee and treated them like they mattered, you were doing something real, something that counted. She paused. He also believed that when you found something wrong, you documented it. You kept the record. You trusted that eventually the truth would be stronger than the people trying to bury it. She looked at her father. He was looking at her with his hands folded on the table in front of him and his eyes very bright. He was right about both things. The room was quiet. I walked up to a table of 50 Hells Angels riders 3 weeks ago, she said, because I recognized a bracelet. That's the whole of it. I was scared. I walked up anyway. And what happened next happened because of the people in this room, because of a road captain who honored a debt for 11 years, because of a retired school teacher who knew her students' families, because of a rancher who made 8 phone calls before sunrise, because of a 71-year-old man who kept a logbook in red ink because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't. She stopped. Because of 47 families who lost something real and never stopped knowing it was wrong. She looked at the room. None of this was one person. This was all of us finally in the same place at the same time. A reporter from the back of the room, not Sandra, a television reporter Emily didn't know, called out, "Miss Carter, what made you walk toward that table when everyone else stayed back?" Emily looked at the reporter. She thought about the question. She thought about the flower on her apron and the grief she had been carrying and the bracelet on Jack Donovan's wrist and the 5 years of Tuesday nights talking to her father's photograph. She thought about courage, what it actually was, which was not the absence of fear, but the presence of something that mattered more than fear. Sometimes the truth is more important than fear, she said. The room was quiet for 1 second. Then it was not quiet. Michael Carter stood up from his seat in the front row. He was not a man who made grand gestures. He had never been that man. He stood up the way he did everything simply without announcement, and he started clapping, and the sound of it was just one person's hands at first, and then it was the whole room, all 400 people, in the overflow room, through the speakers and the people in the parking lot who heard it secondhand and understood from the sound alone that something had concluded. Emily stood at the microphone and looked at her father standing in the front row, and she did not try to manage what she was feeling. She had been managing things for 3 weeks and for 5 years before that, and she gave herself permission in this room in this moment to simply feel the full weight of what had happened and to let it be as large as it actually was. It was very large. Formal fraud charges against Gerald Foss were filed 6 weeks later. Commissioner Harrigan was charged separately. 2 additional county employees named in the documentation were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The title company in Phoenix lost its operating license. The circuit court issued preliminary rulings favorable to 19 of the 31 property recovery claims within the first month. Roy Pelham, still in his care facility in Prescott, was visited by his granddaughter on the Saturday after the hearing. His daughter reported that when the granddaughter read him the headline of Sandra's follow-up article, Roy Pelham squeezed his granddaughter's hand. It was the first purposeful movement he had made in months. His daughter called Emily to tell her. Emily sat down when she heard it and stayed sitting for a while. Arthur Vines retired from the county recorder's office 4 months after the hearing on his own timeline, with a formal commendation from the state attorney general's office for his cooperation. At his retirement gathering small at his daughter's house, family and a few colleagues, his granddaughter gave a toast that she had written herself in crayon on a piece of paper that said, "My grandpa was brave." Vines kept the paper in his wallet for the rest of his life. The Gutierrez family got their ranch back. The court ruling came on a Wednesday afternoon, and Rosa called Emily from the property the same evening, standing in the middle of the land that had been her grandfather's and her father's, and that was now hers again. And she said, "I'm standing here, Emily. I'm standing right here on it." And Emily could hear in her voice the particular quality of a person who has returned to something they thought was permanently lost and discovered that the ground still knows them. On the 1-year anniversary of that Tuesday in July, 53 Hells Angels riders came back to Red Creek. 3 more than the first time. They came on a Saturday morning, and the whole town knew they were coming because it had been in the local paper and because word travels fast in a small town when it's good news for a change. They parked in the lot and came into the diner, and Emily served them coffee and chicken fried steak because it was a Saturday and not a Tuesday, and the Tuesday special did not apply, but she made it anyway because she wanted to. Michael Carter worked the grill. He had been working the grill 6 days a week since he came home, which was more days than Pete technically thought was necessary. But neither Pete nor Emily had said so, because watching Michael Carter cook in his own kitchen was something neither of them had any interest in interrupting. Jack Donovan sat at the counter in the same seat he had occupied on that first Tuesday, and he drank his coffee and he looked at the room, at the full tables, at the families who had come in, not just for the food, but to be part of the morning at Michael, visible through the pass-through at Carol Carter, refilling coffee with the ease of someone who has found her way back to a life she had thought was finished. And Emily, passing behind the counter, looked at him and said, "What are you thinking?" Jack wrapped both hands around his mug. He was quiet for a moment. "Your father said that night on the phone that he didn't know if any of it would ever come out. He said the truth has a way of getting buried and staying buried." He looked up at her. He was wrong about that. Emily looked around the diner. At the memorial wall they had built beside the register, not large, not dramatic, just a small framed collection of photographs and names, the people who had stood for something in Red Creek and paid a price and deserved to be remembered. Her father's photograph was there, not because he was gone, but because he had been the first one to stand. He had insisted on being included. He had said that memorials were not for the dead, they were for the truth, and the truth of what he had done was real, whether he was here to see it or not. He was wrong about a lot of things, Emily said. He was also right about most of the important ones. She topped off Jack's coffee. He nodded. She moved down the counter to the next customer. Outside, the parking lot was full. The sun was doing what it always did in Red Creek in July, which was bearing down without apology, the kind of heat that made everything shimmer slightly at the edges and made the air itself feel alive. But inside the diner, the ceiling fans turned, and the coffee was hot, and the grill was going, and the people of Red Creek, Arizona were feeding each other on a Saturday morning in the town they had gotten back. A 24-year-old waitress had walked across a silent room toward the most feared table in it, and she had asked one question, and the question had cracked open 5 years of buried truth, and the truth had turned out to be as truth usually is, when enough people are finally willing to stand in the same place and speak it out loud, at the same time stronger than everything that had been used to bury it. Some things in this world stay buried, but not this one. Not in Red Creek. Not on the day that Emily Carter decided that fear was something you felt and then walked through anyway, that silence was a choice. And so was speaking that a bracelet on a stranger's wrist was worth crossing a room for, and that the people you love are always, always worth coming back to. This one came all the way to the surface, and it stayed there.